Hello, Colby. Hope you are fine and well. Myself, Azim Shah. We are with Mr. Imran Mirza. He's from Dubai and he's doing landscape and cityscape photography. So,
Hi, Colby. I hope you find today. So, I'm actually from the UK, but I moved to Dubai a couple of years ago. I've settled here and I'm doing photography and worked a bit on news as well, so doing news coverage and stuff. And I left that just before the actual COVID came in. I kind of left that job to do something different. But yeah, I've been a landscape photographer for about 15 years now. Work with brands like Nissi, F-Stop Gear, Canon, and stuff like this. But I'm taking the backseat quite a bit now, so I'm doing a lot more of this sort of stuff with Azim and some other colleagues, working on interviews, working on a bit of education. But things are changing quite dramatically since I've moved here. You have to adapt, and then especially with the COVID kicking in, it just really has changed our plans. One thing I didn't consider when I moved here was how hot it can get, and in the summer it becomes so difficult to try to go out and take any shots. And I know you've shot nearly all over the world. I was reading your bio, and I do follow you for quite some time. I'm not sure if you've actually come and set up and tried to shoot here in Dubai, but it's immensely difficult because of the rules and regulations and everything being like private property and stuff like this. It makes it so hard. You need so much permission to try to shoot something, and rooftops can be quite difficult. But if you know the right people and right connections, then obviously it's all hunky dory. But apart from that, that's me. I'm not going to keep it about me because I've done my bit. This is about you, so we shall talk about you. I'll let Azim take over and go ahead with the first question and continue.
Sounds good. Thanks, man. That
so
was
straight
great.
jump to straight jump to first question. So, Colby, what inspired you to do photography? What's the philosophy for you of photography?
So for me, I got inspired to do photography. I mean, I've been doing it for 13 years now, and what really pulled me in the very beginning was actually not a love of photography, or even, to be honest, a love of art. I played sports my entire life, and that was kind of my focus, at least up until university. And it was more so the inspiration or origin point was about a love of travel and experience, where I had started traveling a little bit at the end of high school just before I got to university. And then throughout my time in university, I'd take off a semester here and there and go traveling. So by the time I graduated, I wanted to be out there and seeing more of the world, to put myself into uncomfortable situations where I didn't speak the language. I liked being out of my element. I liked the challenge that it brought to me. And I liked seeing, as I mentioned, how the other side of the world worked and lived and believed. And so I got really addicted to this idea of travel. So by the time that I graduated from college, I was working at a hospital as a safety administrator. Coincidentally, like putting together mitigation plans for things like pandemics and stuff like that. And just realized that, 6 months into it, that the whole standard 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 regular job here in the US just wasn't for me personality wise. I just couldn't handle it. And so I moved up to British Columbia, Canada. I was living in Dallas, Texas at the time, moved up to British Columbia. And it was there that I kind of spent a few months trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and had that realization that I wanted to be back traveling. I was single at the time. I could be nomadic. I didn't have much debt. And so I just started traveling around the world. And the reason that I picked up a camera was purely because I thought it was going to give me a little bit of extra income on the side so that I can keep traveling and just kind of travel as a backpacker or do something and just kind of keep going around the world, having new and unique experiences. And it just so happened that it turned into a passion. And it was 3 years after I picked up my first camera that I ended up getting hired by National Geographic to essentially lead some of their expedition programs, specifically their student expedition programs in South America. And that kind of spurred the rest of my career into a trajectory of both photo education and, documentary work and working with different companies and all sorts of different stuff. And so that's the long-winded answer for kind of what inspired me to get into photography. But in terms of what is my philosophy, I think these days it comes down to trying to dance the line between reality and the emotional connection that I share with the subjects that I'm capturing. I'm trying to create works of art that are real, but at the same time are evoking emotional responses. The use that I have for color, light, atmosphere, contrast, shadows, all are important to invoke what I probably consider more moody or atmospheric images. I do take a little bit more creative licensing when it comes to landscape work than I do, say, for wildlife or photojournalism. But I would say that regardless, my goal is to have viewers feel something, feel as if they are there, to feel an emotional attachment, whether that's happiness, admiration, anger, sadness, and the use of color and atmosphere, I think, plays a long way into that. So it's not only how I shoot, but how I process my images help to invoke those kind of emotional reactions that I feel allow people to feel more connected to certain types of images or certain aspects of my portfolio that I create and share with the world. And I've always found it interesting from a story standpoint that I look at photography from this mindset that we're creating stories and we're capturing subjects and you know, there are aspects of, you know, plot lines and backstory and all this stuff that we as creators can attempt to put into the images that we create. But because we're limited by this two-dimensional medium that we work with, we can only do so much. And the really, really awesome thing about photography is that I try to lead people in a direction that I'm hoping that they go to based on my choice of, again, subject matter, composition, atmosphere, light, post-processing style. And then they fill in the rest with their other side, which to me is the most fascinating part of art, is that it's so subjective, where I can have such an idea or a thought process of where something's going to go. And then on the back side, or on the other side, the viewers are applying their own experiences, their own thoughts and feelings. And that to me is really unique and part of the fun aspects of my approach to photography that I like to try to take into account, but also I'm sometimes surprised by what people come away with when they're discussing or when we're talking about images or experiences or things like that. So hopefully that's a long-winded answer to your question, but that's kind of wraps up my initial thoughts.
That's actually answered a few questions in one there. You talked about the philosophy, which is it's just beautiful to hear. And I talked to loads of photographers, but many haven't probably described it as gracefully as you actually have there. And you've answered the question which we were going to ask about the post-processing, the thinking behind it, and that is probably the first time I've heard the answer. Going to the reason as to why you do it, to invoke certain emotions, and you named quite a few of them over there. Looking at your images, Azim's is sharing them down on screen now so the viewers can see. I'm hoping one of the emotions you did say was anger and maybe stuff like this. I'm hoping, looking at your amazing, beautiful, colorful images, that we don't invoke those kind of emotions. And if they do feel that, it's going to definitely turn into a smile or some sort of awe that, amazing stuff.
Of course. I mean, if you think back though, when I think of especially like my wildlife stuff, or you could include photojournalistic style. I don't shoot for newspapers, for example, but I have been to places right after disasters to kind of document what's going on. So whether it was Haiti after the 2010 earthquake, I was in Tacloban in the Philippines shortly after the 2013 typhoon that went through there and killed thousands and thousands of people. Whether it's that types of images or even certain aspects of wildlife, in terms of conservation and trying to protect stuff, you're telling a story sometimes with the image, sometimes with the caption, and sometimes it does invoke a negative reaction where people are upset because something's not being protected, where people are not doing as much as they could to protect Mother Nature or protect species or to treat other human beings like human beings. There's so much misinformation out there and lack of understanding of different cultures and ideas and belief systems and religions that I think occasionally in those situations, negative reactions or sadness can be beneficial or can sometimes be the point, because sometimes it requires that type of reaction for people to begin to care, where sometimes when things are too positive or too rosy, I find that people take it for granted. It's like they look to photography for this outlet to kind of separate the world from their reality, which is great. We need that at times. But I think sometimes we also need a reality check. And so I certainly prefer overall, yes, more of a positive emotional attachment to the images I create. But occasionally those negative reactions are actually exactly what we as a species probably need in order to pay more attention to some of the details that we might be overlooking with either animals or how we treat other human beings and all sorts of stuff like that.
I guess this can tie into the next question, which was going to talk about the charity work which you do. But before I go on to that, I'm going to have to ask you quickly: are you an Apple or an Android person?
That's it. Now we're getting into the crazy stuff. Yeah,
There's a
I
reason
used to
behind
shoot.
it. It's because you said something, and I'm going to answer that question. That's why I'm asking.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I get technically historically both. I used to use nothing but Apple products, and then
Okay.
at some point in time in the last few years, I would say got a little bit bored with the direction I felt they were going and switched over. And so nowadays, my studios, my assistants, everyone, we typically are Android and PC users rather than Apple.
Right. Okay, I'll tell you anyway. The reason I asked that question was simply because, again, we were talking about your images, and you talked about how we capture it all in this. We capture this 3D world in this 2D medium, which is what we have. The joke was basically going to be, like on the iPhone now, you can have this feature where, I mean, I don't know how you do it. It's like a 3D picture where when you rotate the screen, the image kind of moves. So I was going to say, whatever camera you're using, ditch it. You need to get an iPhone, and then you can capture it in the 3D the way it's meant to
Absolutely.
be. I
Absolutely.
mean,
It
it's
uses depth. It's really cool with the multiple lenses that they're doing and
yeah,
stuff like that. It's
yeah.
it definitely it's still obviously the illusion of 3D because it's using computational photography to pull it together.
Of course
But
it
I
is.
do agree. Anything that enhances that type of image viewing experience is cool technology. It's interesting time to be a photographer in this digital age for sure.
So coming on to about the giving lens and the considerable amount of charity work that you do, it's absolutely amazing to hear the way you actually do this, the way you go out and you're not only just teaching them something, like how to use a camera, but they're learning how to use it for the best in their environment so they can document their purposes really well with certain charities. And that is one skill I think they keep for life really. It helps them do things better. And it's not like, oh, I'm a hobbyist photographer, I'm going to go to this and learn, and then you put it away and then you never look at it ever again. This is stuff that they're doing every day, and it's just amazing to hear that. What probably got you into that side of things? I mean, going back, you quite emotionally spoke about, how negative things do happen. Like, for example, going back to the earthquake and how treatment of mistreatment of animals and human beings and stuff like that. You obviously have got some sort of connection, or you have got that soft side of you. What what is it that actually got you into the charity thing more with, to relate the photography into that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And I mean, I think you had a really great segue into that in terms of the emotional response. For me, in the initial early days of, as I mentioned, when I started realizing that I wanted to be traveling and I picked up a camera for the first time, in those first few years, I actually spent living in Southeast Asia at the time. Because again, I was single nomadic. I picked a one-way ticket to Bangkok actually, and ended up living that over in Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar for a number of years. And those early times, it wasn't my first international trip. It was certainly the first time I was out on my own. I made a lot of mistakes. I had a lot of assumptions. And to be honest, I ended up getting upset and I felt disconnected from humanity because at the time, for being so fresh into that world and to be in an emotional state that was so raw because I was by myself and I was trying to challenge myself and to put myself in these uncomfortable situations, as I mentioned before, which is a place that I really like for myself to be because of how it challenges me, is that I saw the disparity between, the allure of travel and the reality of actually experiencing locations. I saw the disconnect between the money that I was spending and where it was actually going to help people. I saw the dehumanizing nature of travel photography specifically. Certainly happens with tourists as well, but travel photography, visiting, developing countries as a privileged foreigner and this disconnect that was between myself and this camera that was in the way, and then the human being that was on the other side. And that was really unsettling to me. And I had a number of nights where situations that presented themselves of, kids on the street and all sorts of stuff, where I would go back to my hotel room just bawling, just emotionally. It was very difficult for me to accept a part of this situation, but also see that there wasn't that many viable options in order to break through the typical stereotypical experiences that most of us have when we travel, where we don't really get to know people. We don't really get to know their challenges. We don't really get to know the culture in a country. We have these superficial experiences that are only, inches deep, and we don't really dive into those challenges and get to know them and try to figure out how we can tangibly actually help and make a difference. And so that was the kind of inspiration behind the Giving Lens. It actually initially started in Haiti, as an organization I started with a few other creatives when I was living in Colorado, called L'Espoir Haiti, which means Help Haiti. And it was after the 2010 earthquake, and we went down there and we supported some small NGOs. We brought images, we raised some money, and I thought about what we were doing there, and I was happy with what we were doing, but I wanted to expand. I wanted to do more for more people in more countries and more cultures, and fighting for more causes. And that's what caused me to start the Giving Lens, as we're seeing right now looking on the Giving Lens website. And so the really quick breakdown for TGL, the Giving Lens, that I have, is that the idea behind it is the immersion of our passion for art with support for sustainable development organization or initiatives or causes, working predominantly but not purely in countries all over the world that are still developing or still have real challenges facing them, where we can bring teams of photographers from various different skill sets, some professional, some people just starting out, and we put them into collaborative learning environments where we are helping do hands-on work with organizations that are fighting for very specific causes, clean drinking water projects, youth education projects, refugees out of Syria, refugees coming up of Central and South America into Mexico trying to get into the United States. Very specific causes, very small organizations that need support, that need advocacy, where we can do fundraising through these trips, where we donate lots of money to them based on the money coming in from people wanting to sign up and go on these experiences. And then we get there, and as you mentioned, we're also breaking down the core concepts of what people think about when they travel, or even when they are thinking about reaching out to different organizations, to know what to look for organizations that are actually empowering local communities rather than creating cycles of dependence, which we see a lot in the humanitarian world, where organizations have good mindsets and good ideas and good hearts of what they want to do, but in reality, all they're doing is creating a cycle of dependence of whatever population of people they're trying to help. They are just giving handouts, which doesn't solve a problem. It's an unsustainable approach to humanitarian efforts, where we like to instead partner with organizations that are hiring local individuals, that are supporting local communities, that are hopefully building local industries or economies. And in doing so, the idea is that every NGO, every organization that we at least partner with, their goal is to either completely pass over their organization to the local population, or at the bare minimum to ultimately dissolve, because the idea is that you're solving the problem rather than creating a situation where you're always needed. And so there's very specific aspects of that we try to bring into the educational side of things, not just from let me teach you how to create better images in situations that are foreign to you, which is important, and what we do and how we advocate for a lot of these organizations, how we raise money, but also how to be good stewards for your own cultures, how to educate other people, and to understand the benefits of working with other individuals that have different belief systems and different ideologies, and how we as a whole can be better human beings toward each other. And so those kind of all mix together to create what the Giving Lens is now. And it's been a pretty amazing journey to see how it's evolved and adapted over the years. It started in 2011. We're in 2020 now. And, every year we learn more. We try to help more. We try to raise more money. And it's been fun.
So we were just looking at the website, and you talked about how it's growing and you've got more people coming and people from different backgrounds on helping out. Is that how your team has expanded? Obviously, you've done really, really well over the years, and you've needed that extra set of hands. Where do you think you might be in the next, let's say, about 5, 6 years? Do you think you'll have double the team, or is that going to expand, or is it going to stay as it is? Or does it depend on where you find a certain need? Because obviously, the world isn't. I'd love to say the world is a really nice place to live in, but unfortunately, it probably isn't the best. And we know this. There is still a lot of work to do. How would you determine where you think you might need to go next? How is that probably decided or judged? Where do you see this?
That's a good question. I mean, between the Giving Lens and my main company, Colby Brown Photography, we have a handful of employees, independent contractors, and we're constantly trying to figure out this exact question: how do we expand? Where do we expand? Where do we put our attention? And how do we do so smartly, creatively? I think a lot of individuals these days that are starting out are always looking for these shortcuts. I want to rise to fame. I want to start making lots of money. I want to do X, Y, and Z. And the challenge with that is that it's not realistic. I mean, it happens, certainly. There are opportunities that present themselves that skyrocket people to certain aspects of if you want to use the term fame. But in reality, mitigated and controlled growth is always the most sustainable and best approach to controlling the amount of success and controlling the amount of expansion that you can do so that you can handle the additional workloads. And so for us with the Giving Lens, as well as with Colby Brown Photography, I'm constantly looking at the world situation. Like obviously right now with COVID, things are crazy. Things are different. It's thrown a giant wrench into all of our plans. But we're constantly looking and seeing how we can adapt as organizations, how we can be nimble, how we can be agile in order to adjust our plans and organically let things shift and change. I think that's the biggest key that I've learned between dealing with this as well as dealing with the 2008, 2009 economic crash, around the world that started in the U.S. and kind of spread around everywhere else as well, is that you have to be adaptable. You have to be able to evolve and change on the spot. And the people that can do that are the ones that obviously survive these situations, and the ones that don't, unfortunately, their businesses typically fold. And so we're constantly looking to see, coming back to the Giving Lens, what are different places we can expand to. We kind of do want to cap the amount of trips or experiences we want off in a given year. We don't want to be the organization that has 50 different trips and they're all disconnected. Like that's not who we want to be. We always want to stay this, relatively small sized organization where we don't want to expand too drastically in that particular direction, but we're constantly looking at new ways in order to innovate and new ways to create more sustainable types of experiences that are more long lasting. One of those ideas that I've been kicking around in my head for a number of years that I'd love to start implementing and might be pushed back another year or two because of COVID. But instead of just focusing on these types of trips where we come in and we work with local organizations, we provide photography assistance, we do training with them. Typically, that's one of the standard approaches that we do, is that I would love to build, photography schools in countries all over the world where we're hiring locals, people to train them to be photographers and to be educators, in which case those people can then train other people within their communities, and it gives a viable pathway for careers or for opportunities, whether it's in tourism or education or something else. That to me is exponentially more sustainable and something that I would like to get more towards, rather than annually or biannually giving lots of money to the 10 or 12 organizations we work with in a given year, which is helpful. Organizations need money. They have resources that they need to get. They have help, support they need to provide. I don't want to stop doing that, but I do want to take the concept of what we're doing, put it into the hands of more local communities, and try to see if we ourselves can build many little industries, or at least support them, so that more people can get exponential benefit and tangible benefits out of our involvement. That is mostly, let us set you up, get you set it up, we'll help with funding, we'll help pull these pieces together, and then you can then start training the next generation of people going out there. And This is kind of a concept I got from one of our organizations in Nicaragua called Empowerment International. They had a small photography program before we connected with them back in 2011, but we've helped expand that exponentially. And right now, 9 years later, I'm seeing kids that came through this program because it's a youth education program based in Granada and the slums and the barrios outside of it. And I'm seeing kids right now that are graduating from college, coming from these barrios that were part of this program way back 9 years ago, and that are now having jobs and careers and doing stuff, which we are great to be helpful and be part of that piece and supporting Empowerment International. But like I said, we want to take that concept and let's do it in 10 or 15 or 20 different countries and expand it out and build these schools so that we can be training exponentially more people in order to have more opportunities than they would have had otherwise. That to me is kind of my goal, where I'd love to be in 5 years, is to have that moving forward and have us doing more things like that rather than expanding from 10 or 12 or 15 different trips to let's keep those small, but let's expand our mindset of what we want to do and how we can help people.
So it's more that
That's great.
so you're talking about the purpose and stuff like that really as well, aren't you? That's such a beautiful answer, is that. We're going to move on to, I think, the last question which we have was, you mentioned as well COVID and the lockdown which we have right now. And there isn't really a lot that people can do. So you do get a little disheartened. I mean, sometimes myself, I'm looking for things to shoot and stuff to do. What sort of advice can you give to people? I actually do have a friend at this moment who's a little, who's not very motivated at the minute. He's, there's my daughter just come into the room, who's really not really motivated at this moment. And what sort of advice would you give to people? Because it is, I mean, it's not only COVID that's getting to them, being, inside every day, all day. It does kind of like get to you in the sense, you do want to go out for a walk and stuff. So people are losing motivation. What sort of advice can you give to people who are feeling like that, but are blaming photography? I mean, photography probably isn't the cause, but because they're not going out, they feel like it is.
Right. It gets blamed for sure as part of the. I totally get what you're saying.
As well, but I had a bit of a breakdown, and I kind of did blame. I did the same thing, but I blamed the photography, and I made a video about it. But later on, discovered that it probably was me looking at the situation too. I was too looking into it too deep. I was thinking myself and trying to compare myself perhaps with the situation and people as well, and I just didn't think I was what I wanted to be. But then later on, I took the time out, chilled out, went camping, had some time to think, and we came back and everything was better, and it was only a couple of days. So what sort of advice could you give to people like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like I said, it's a great question, and it's a reality for a lot of us, is that we find ourselves in a situation where photography, whether we're doing this professionally, whether we're doing this semi-professionally, or whether we're doing this just for our own personal enjoyment, it's become a cathartic experience that is an outlet for many of us emotionally, creatively, intellectually. And if we have that all of a sudden hampered, it becomes more problematic. We start going back to old ways. We start getting agitated. I myself, I travel 6 months out of the year. I'm 2.5 months into this, stay-at-home order, and I'm doing okay. In 2 more months, you might have to have another conversation with me to see, if I'm a little bit more stir crazy or have more cabin fever. But, coming back to your question specifically in terms of answers, I think there's a handful of things that we can do. I mean, depending on your country, depending on the laws of where you're specifically living, a lot of us are still allowed to go outside. We just have to be, social distancing and do a handful of different other things. Yeah. So if you get the opportunity, definitely find ways to take break, even if it's a couple times out of the day, even if it's for 10, 15 minutes, and go walk around your neighborhood, get a breath of fresh air, whether you bring your camera or not is your own choice, but get out of the stuffiness of being locked inside. I think that's, key for general health, let alone, creative exercises and taking a break, as you mentioned what you did with camping. Outside of that, when it comes to actual photography, there's a few things that we can do that I think sometimes we overlook or sometimes we don't think too much about. So first and foremost, force yourself to use specific lenses that you haven't used in a while or that has been, laying on your desk that has been capturing dust. For me, that oftentimes in situations like this comes back to a macro lens. I don't use it on most of my trips around the world, but when I'm stuck in home or just in my local neighborhood, picking it up, taking it outside, even if it's in my own backyard or whatever's happening. It gives me the ability to kind of focus on details that I was overlooking or taking for granted. And in doing so, it forces me to get creative in a situation where normally I might reach for more, more common lenses or camera gear based on habit. I constantly go for my 16 to 35. I constantly go for this lens for wildlife. If you force yourself to use a lens you haven't used in a while and only use that lens, you are getting the creative juices going and you are challenging yourself, which is one of the things that I think a lot of people miss when they feel they're stuck inside and they're hitting a creative roadblock. The way to break through that for a lot of us is to force yourself down a pathway and to give yourself an assignment. And that's kind of a segue into the second one, which is, finding a passion project. There's a handful of photographers out there getting super creative, and whether it's documenting stuff in their own home, whether it's documenting how they're dealing with the pandemic, whether it's documenting how their communities are empty, or whatever it might be. Give yourself a theme, give yourself a story assignment. Act like you're a photojournalist and try to give yourself this idea of, what type of story that you think is important to you that you could document, and then gives yourself something to work towards. I think that's a really great focus to, again, creative juices flowing, helps get you back into storytelling mode, and gives you something to share with other people as well, which we're all going through this, so we all have this kind of common ground. And then the last piece of advice that I would have is that while we are inside, why most of us have access to the internet in some form or fashion, is that now is one of the best times in order to start practicing and working on your post-processing techniques. There are a number of great tutorials out there that I've created, that other people have created, depending on who you aspire to or what type of images or genres of photography you're into, that you could then begin experimenting and learning new techniques, learning new applications, and then applying them to your images, whether they're old images or not, it doesn't matter. You then get to use this time and no longer have the excuse of, I don't have time, I have to work, I have to do these other things, and use it to kind of learn a new technique, learn a new tip, learn a new application. I think now is one of the best times for that. I myself am even doing that, where I'm like, I want to play around with more subjective use of light in certain situations. So whether it's, Joshua Snow or, Alex Noriego or some other landscape photographers that have a style that I like, maybe I can pick a few pieces of what they're doing and pull it off together. Right now we're scrolling on my education page, which has been coming for a while, and building a bunch of stuff on the back end, so I'm not just releasing one or two tutorials at a time. But whether it's myself or other people out there, find people that you aspire to, or that, ignite your imagination, and reach out to them and see if they have tutorials, and pick up a small ebook, pick up, a video tutorial, and learn these new techniques. I think they will go a long way for, what you might try to achieve, and a good use of time while you are stuck at home and while you might not be able to get out and travel around or go do some of these other things as well.
That's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. I could sit here and literally talk to you for ages, Colby. It's really inspirational just to hear, the whole process and the whole reasons behind it. And I can tell, you're speaking with a lot of passion over here. It really does come from the heart, and I think that's really important at the same time. You're talking about being at home and trying to think like a photojournalist, or try to create some sort of story or a reason as to why you are. I think that's somewhere where I actually will admit sometimes do struggle a little bit. Try to find the reason behind the image. If you can't really sometimes think of that valid reason, it becomes more difficult to actually shoot. So this is, you talked about bringing the macro lens out. It's probably one of my favorites. I mean, I have the 135 f2 by Canon, the macro lens. Sorry, f3.5. Nice. And it's a great lens where it helps you really get into those details. But again, the challenge I love about that is so different. The contrast is so different to doing my regular, landscapes and cityscapes, where I automatically within like a minute of putting on the camera, I know exactly what to dial in and what to do. But when it comes to stuff like macro and detail, you really have to think about the aperture and the lighting and thing, and before you know it, I was gone, and you still haven't taken your shot. You're still trying to work on your lights because you got so many lights, and if you haven't got enough lights, how do you layer it all up? So it's a very interesting take on that. I mean, really enjoyed that answer there. It was really, really good. So I hope people can go back and look into that. And obviously your website's there. There's a nice subscribe section which I just saw. They can look into it and keep up to date when all your stuff is out and take it from there. Is there any more questions you wanted to ask there, Azim? Because seriously, I can really go on all night, but I know we've all got things to do as well.
No, I don't have any question. It's a really good, great conversation with you, Colby. So the only question I have, do you have any particular message for the fans you have in Pakistan? So any particular message for Pakistani
Yeah.
photographer community?
I guess in terms of a message, I would say,
Before you answer that question, can I just put in and ask, have you been to that side, to India, Pakistan, or anything along those lines?
I have. I have not been to Pakistan, but I have been to India. I spent a lot of time in Nepal. I go to the Middle East quite often. So the general region of the world, absolutely. Pakistan has been high on my list of actually places to go. I just haven't made it there just yet. But in terms of a piece of advice, I would say that these days, no matter where we're living, it's very easy to get fixated on camera gear and on always wanting something better. The tools that we use, whether we're doing this professionally or not, certainly help us creatively express ourselves maybe easier. If we have the ability to get a little bit more higher end gear. But the reality is that the best camera that you have, the best tool that you have is the one that's most available to you. Whether it's a cell phone or not, you can create amazing pieces of art with something just like a cell phone to a point and shoot camera to anything in between, all the way up to the high end cameras that are thousands of dollars. Don't fixate too much as you are learning about the gear. Try to focus on your technique, focus on your skill and your understanding of composition. If you go to YouTube, you'll see tons of videos of professional photographers that are, comparing themselves taking shots with a small, tiny, cheap camera to someone that doesn't know what they're doing that are using the big camera stuff. So don't fixate too much on the gear. Follow your passion. Shoot things that you're passionate about, that you like, that you're attracted to naturally, and use whatever gear you have to improve your craft. And then hopefully down the line, you'll have the opportunity to kind of think about gear in a different way, so that if you can upgrade, you upgrade, and if not, you use what you have. I still use my phone all the time to take images, even though I have big cameras. It all depends on what we're trying to focus on, what story you're trying to tell, and who you're sharing it with. So that would be my advice to those in Pakistan. Focus on your craft, focus on being good storytellers, and the rest will come, or hopefully will come, but at least you have the core concepts of what it takes to be a visual storyteller, to be a photographer, a cinematographer. Those are the core elements that are harder to teach, but that you can hone yourself, and you don't have to worry about acquiring other gear in order to do it.
Just quickly add on to that, is when you talk about visual storytellers, I mean, slightly ever so different to maybe what a photographer might be. So I think you can actually get away with the technology that there is in mobile phones nowadays, to take some phenomenal images, even video as well. You can do some amazing slow motion, and you can actually create really interesting stories. So that's a very, very good point there. Sorry, Azim.
So it's great conversation with you, Colby. First of all, I'm really glad you accept our invitation for this interview. And I'm thankful on behalf of my forum, which is TPPF. And it's really great conversation. Hope to see you soon in Pakistan. And we are here to host you. And we are eagerly waiting for this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, just really quickly, you guys were awesome. I appreciate you guys reaching out. I love having conversations like this. I love reaching new audiences. So if you guys ever need anything in the future, or anyone listening has any questions, feel free to reach out. Sometimes it takes me a little bit to get back to you because I do have a lot of other things going on, but I'm always happy to help. I'm always happy to have conversations. And I love seeing other people's passion about same things I'm passionate about. It gives us all a connecting point to all feel interconnected. So thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
Opened up a can of worms there. You have just opened up a can of worms. You just wait until this comes out and watch how your inbox is loaded.
I love it. I love it.
So, yeah.
So see you really soon, Colby.
Thank you so much.
Another day, inshallah. So
Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
You guys take care. You guys are awesome.
Take care.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.